Welcome to Ask Strong Towns Anything. I'm Norm, and I'm delighted to be able to take this time with fellow Strong Towns members to be able to grapple with many of the serious challenges that we face in our communities, as well as to take a look at some of the practices that are sometimes tried and true, other times new and novel and worth exploring further. And that's definitely something that we want to take up together. So we've got a good crew. I'm glad that you're making time in what might be your lunch break or your coffee break to be able to take this up together. And then if you're watching this afterwards, I just reassured the folks that are on the call here how much value is gained from this interchange and the dialogue that we can have together, the passing on of ideas and resources. Even just before we opened here, we were talking about permaculture and the ways in which there's so much overlap with the Strong Towns mission of making good use of scarce resources and how that aligns with and really benefits the similar ideas of permaculture and things like this. But today we're going to start. Aaron, why don't you dropped it in the chat? Oh, why don't you unmute and just share a little bit about your question and some of the context behind it? Aaron Denny, that is. Aaron Caldwell's got a deer in the headlights look. Aaron, go ahead.
Um, yeah, so my day job is for a small
I'm going to
city.
pause you there. Aaron, I'm not sure if there's anything you can do with your audio. Otherwise, I might just stick with what you posted in the chat. It's really choppy. And I see a few other people leaning in trying to catch what you're saying. So if you have a second mic, otherwise I'll just read it out. So you said the state DOT is looking to move our highway out of town. Would love some thoughts on that from the group because the departmental rep is there. For context, let me see if I can pull up quickly. Does anybody have a highway bypass that has been useful, or does anybody have a highway bypass project that has been a drain on the community? And if you've watched Cars, you'll know that that's a key plot point in the movie Cars. But Pixar is not our only source of info on opportunities for communities. Jay, what about you?
Yeah,
So I guess you're in San Antonio, so you have highways everywhere. But
yeah, well, we do have highways everywhere. But no, I was actually more thinking a lot of the smaller towns here in Texas. They actually do bypasses quite a bit, and so they'll even do loop bypasses around everything. So I mean, it is a fairly common thing. The only thing that I've noticed is that almost always what happens is that development will move towards the highway.
Yeah.
Just because the fact that's where traffic's at, that's where cars are at. And so kind of it is the Cars entire premise of Cars is that, yeah, the town died because of the fact that they bypassed going through town. Not that I think that that's the correct way to do it, but it does make it there is a valid point there in Cars in that, yes, the development is going to happen where the people are at. And so if we continue as a car-centric culture, we're still going to have the problem. So,
Yeah, I had a conversation with the mayor of Chugwater, Wyoming. Here, I'll pull up. My things aren't working today. My flashy screens all got reset, and I have to redo them. So I know I will share a screen like a regular person. Bear with me. But Chugwater is a good example of this. So this is a small town in Wyoming. And they had the highway previously run through on the Chugwater Highway, and then it got rerouted. They made the decision as a community, if you can see this on the screen, a significant investment was made for the Buffalo Lodge to get its own road rather than repurposing existing streets. They gave it its own road, and if you go in on street maps, you can see the way in which that has like carved it off to the side. This thing is barely holding on. Whatever subsidies went into like making it like viable have long since vanished, and like now it's not a viable like alternative. They created a big rest area, but of course they didn't incorporate that into the actual town, and so you get to your point, Jay, if you just use the bypass as a tool to simply double down on highway-oriented development, none of these things are integrated in the community or really helping. What's really cool about it is they just said, well, we won't be able to actually do anything about what they did with the highway. But this was one of the projects of one of their community members who, what's her name? Jill, who has a podcast, I will have to find it. Just redevelop this. They put the Mercantile on the other side of the street, and that's a place you can go grab a coffee. You can do all those sorts of things like this. And what they recognize is like, yes, we have less traffic now on this stretch, so let's do small things. They've tried to introduce, things like these little you can see they're trying to add in a little bit of complexity here, a little bit of stuff to make it clear there is a place there. And I think it's interesting. The conceit of the Cars movie is that nobody was stopping by anymore. When the reality is like, actually, much of that work, if the bypass is truly going to help reduce speeds through the community core, that would definitely be a tool that would have a huge, really help to build a sense of place, build a sense of value. However, if you simply use that as a pretext to then sort of shuffle all of your development out to the core, I don't know if you're worse off. I mean, having a highway blast through your town is really tough. There's a lot of communities in central and western Washington, for example, where those routes into the main state parks are so difficult to wrangle because the DOTs simply won't play ball. It has to go through the downtown core, but none of the efforts that could be made to slow people as they move through. So where they might even have a plausible likelihood of pulling over and stopping and discovering, when you see that mismatch between what the community needs that road to be versus what the state will want it to be, that can definitely be a huge factor there. So, but what about others? Anyone else have either experience with bypasses, or I mean, to bypass or not to bypass? That's the challenge. But I love, Jay, your simple standard of, well, does it spur further highway oriented development that just extracts value, or does it actually create the conditions for a vibrant sort of reestablishment of a community core? I was chatting with folks in Marlborough and Lake, which is a small community in Ontario, and there you could see that mercifully that the highway, sort of provincial highway, it's just 4 lanes, mercifully spares their downtown, does like a dog leg right before it gets to the downtown, and it creates this great condition for like a real vibrant sort of downtown little core. And vehicles are just like bypassing it, and they're spared not having to blast them right through. So that definitely makes a big difference. What about for you, RL, and then Donna? Would love to hear. Yeah, Donna, your context in Bloomington is interesting, but go ahead, RL.
So it just as Aaron was talking about the bypass, it just popped into my mind thinking about the value ratio. I'm all about value ratios recently. I wonder
Mhm.
why we've been talking so much about it. That if you would look, and he said he was going to be talking to the Department of people. If you had a little bit of a chart or map to show how, when the traffic goes through the town, as it always has, what is the we'll call it the value, the money spent, so to speak. We're just talking about cost right now. Revenue to how many merchants along that street. And when you pull that traffic out to the bypass, because of course bypasses will always lure traffic away, um, that money stops coming in on the main street or whatever. And then how a couple of developers out on the bypass will then inherit that income because people will stop there. And so if you would show the imbalance between how much you're taking away from so many businesses downtown to a few out on the edge, you're trying to say, no, think about our community first. Yeah.
Hmm. Donna?
Oh, you're turning it over to me?
I am. Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry.
You have the gavel.
Well, we have experienced many quote bypasses. One that you described, where I think it was in 1970, they put a bypass that circles the core. So that then causes a problem with even walkability, where the neighboring or the neighborhoods just outside or on the other side of that street can't even get to the downtown, which is their closest shopping area. And then I guess it was back in the 70s and 80s, they also did a bypass um, around the city. And then what happened is that over time, the community jumped the bypass, and now that bypass is the main street, so to speak. And they're even talking about building another bypass, and I'm like, no, 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 that's the biggest waste of money. Um, but what I do want to say is that if you take the strong towns philosophy and apply it, a bypass really should only be viewed and used as a true street or highway to get people from point A to point B, rather than to turning it into a street for as an economic driver. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and if we look at, for instance, where Aaron, I saw the map that you shared in the chat, which is excellent. So the proposal is basically to run Highway 20 up here through this rough area rather than down through the main stretch. And so one of the questions is, is it possible to actually allow vehicles to slow in this stretch? I'm curious. I mean, this is not the type of this is already 4 lanes, but the proposal, Aaron, is to basically double it, or sorry, no, not double, but do a full divided thing. This is not the type of high value frontage that the city benefits from. This is one of those things where you would say this looks to be already a very capable type of highway sort of road environment, just with some of the Strode-like features next to it. But these are all businesses that, if you control access, wouldn't be that difficult. So it's interesting that they would be looking to spend additional funds to basically redo what already exists. You've got, all of this is already highway oriented, so you've already committed to it. The only challenge is you've got some of these homes that are on the other side of the what is the highway. But just for context, it is interesting to see the way that it's situated just outside of the Yellowstone. And so the pitch, I guess, would be here, but you're doing a lot of reconfiguration for not a lot of benefit, and that would seem to be in a time of limited funding. One of the considerations to take into account is, is there not a better way, for example, within the town of Ashton, to figure out, all right, with what if we took that money and instead use it for some simple, well, actually, I always have to pause there. I always recognize most of the time the money is not on the table unless you use it for the designated purpose. And that is one of the perverse sort of incentives is they're being told, well, we have money to do the thing with the bright red line. We don't have money if you want to do something to do some traffic calming on Highway 20 or get the main street to function more effectively, improving the intersection at Main Street so that way people are more inclined to visit the town. You've got sweeping slip lanes that are getting people into town. But I'm kind of surprised actually by the size and scale of the infrastructure for a fairly remote area in Idaho. Like maybe that's one of the other things that stands out. I can share the link to here. Aaron, I wish we had better audio for you because I'd be interested to pick your thoughts on it. But it is one of those things. There's already really hefty vehicle infrastructure built in to the community, and it makes you wonder why further spending would be required. Or maybe maybe Idaho is that wealthy that there are no budget constraints, and so they may as well do more of it. But yeah, interesting question. Oh, go ahead, Aaron. Aaron Denny. Yeah.
I might have got my audio fixed. Does it work now or is it still choppy?
It sounds like you're at the bottom of the ocean, so not
Okay,
great.
well, we'll just pass then.
All right. I hope you are okay though. So, but good to have you here. Let's pick up another question then. We've got John asking about deferred maintenance. You are presenting. So let me just say, I love that this is an opportunity to take in quick reps before meetings, sort of bouncing ideas off of each other. I'll say that I've definitely used that. It's helped to inform my own presentations to council and other things like this, being able to talk about this ahead of time. But John, you ask, I'll be presenting at the Oklahoma Recreation and Park Society in November about the article that Chuck wrote. If we're not going to maintain what we have, then why bother building anything new? If anything else that you believe should be added. John, if you can, why don't you share just a little bit more context, because it's a great question, and that is a classic article. I'll go and link to it as well.
Yeah, it's a so I'll put out that I just left my job as the Parks and Recreation Director for Purcell, Oklahoma. And for my permaculture people, you all would love, I spent 8 years building up habitat all around the lake and getting everything developed. And they're mowing it down today and all this last week because, oh my God, we can't see the water for the grasses and erosion control and all that. So, 2 steps forward, 3 backwards. But part of my coming out of Parks and Recreation for a small municipality, and especially Oklahoma, where municipalities can't leverage property taxes. So it's all sales tax. So we're even worse about deferred maintenance and things of that nature. And so, that article came out in 2019, and it's like, is there any more to that story that I can add from? We all know that everybody will listen to the consultant way before they'll listen to the paid expert in the municipality. And it was more of a question of like, is there something more that people see from the strong town point of view that would be beneficial for me to tell to? I mean, I'm talking to other parks people. They get it. They live it every day. But it's more of what are those little nuggets that they can take back to their leadership that might be, some of those things that start turning the tide.
Yeah. I want to pull up. So we did a session with Jamie Sabick of
Yes.
110%. She's, and I don't know if you got a chance, the Anti-Fragile Parks and Rec, which I had fun titling it. But that was a really interesting one because it was around the question of the goals of like efficiency and consolidation. And she said, like, you actually have most of your communities have a lot more park land already, like under ownership. But the quest is always, well, we're not doing that much with it because we don't have the capital grants coming in, or there's not that other pot of money that we can dip into. And the only time we can dip into that is for new sort of big stuff. I would stress, I mean, the virtues of a neighborhood park, the distribution of load when you can have many, pardon me, neighborhood parks is certainly a key part of it. That what people are searching for is not destinations so much when it comes in parks and recreation. There's always that like the attraction of the spectacular, and who doesn't want to have on their resume or on their sort of profile, I brought in the largest Ferris wheel in northern Oklahoma. And you're like, well, there was only one to begin with, so well done. But the other side is like where we can create these conditions where we're always aiming for peak. So peak performance means, all right, and we see this with softball fields, for example. It's like, all right, when we have the 24-team tournament, are we ready for that? Well, you probably are already with the existing assets in your community. It just means that the people that drove to your community are going to have to drive to their field in order to play their next game. That's not that surprising. And I always find it interesting that like the most non like pedestrian accessible sports and rec like complexes are intended to be pedestrian havens as soon as someone gets there. Or that's the pitch is like they will get there, they'll all have a picnic lunch, and then no one will leave because everyone will have their needs met. Even though you see the steady stream of vehicles coming and going, and I'm a sports parent, I know a little bit about what it's like when a child's like, I've got to go, blow off steam or whatever it is. Like there's definitely that like the energy required to consolidate is almost never worth the cost that it creates. And so that is certainly one of those challenges. I do wonder. I mean, if you are in a purely sales tax position, there's got to be ways to say, like, is there a way for small retail to be incorporated into a lot more of our parks and rec spaces? So that means vendors being welcomed rather than resisted. That means, even neighborhood amenities saying like, well, can we use the parklands for that? For city meetups, is there a way that city, like if you're going to host an info session, what if we used our parks more effectively that way to make them earn their keep more rather than just being sort of bare expanses of grass that need to be watered and maintained? And then certainly the challenge around like cost reduction should not be the leading edge of why we do things like pollinator gardens or wild lawns. But it helps to convince a few grouchy people maybe they should give it a shot. It just is trouble if it's not communicated well. It can't just be, hey, we're going through a budget cut, so we're not cutting the parks this year. It's got to be like, wow, check out, this, and children are discovering, that when they sweep with a net in the field, that it actually like capture so much more than if this is where I get very ecologically minded, but so I appreciate that. Others that have thoughts, Jay, you're unmuted, which I always interpret as a symbol of readiness to jump in, which I know you are always ready. So Jay on parks, and then others on parks as well.
I really don't have anything on parks. I don't know. I guess I did never made myself, but no, I was actually answering the next question. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll take that as a teaser. Other thoughts, suggestions for going into the society. Well, maybe, John, what is the goal or the objective of the society? Because it sounds like they would be good allies or partners, but probably at times very focused on some of the things that maybe in a strong town's orbit are nice to haves, but not must haves. What would that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm a bit of the counterculture of if you can't afford the thing, like if you're not willing to put the money aside for maintenance before you ever build it, don't bother. Like don't even.
Yeah.
And yet we're in the reverse of I don't know how many meetings I have been in where they're just like, "Oh, we'll build it and then we'll figure out the maintenance later."
Hmm.
While we're
Yeah.
arguing that we can't fix the things that we have. When I started, kids were kicking holes through the roofs of pavilions because there was no wood. It was the shingles holding them together.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we're coming from that to wanting to build an $8 million water park like that. So that's where I'm coming at it is maybe we don't need shiny and new. Maybe we need to choke back on that a little bit and just focus mainly on the maintenance piece and not build new. And again, it's the shiny things that get all the attention. So it's really hard to convince people of that. So
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Also, if you're in Oklahoma, steal it from Iowa. Introduce a binzebo. I had no idea that these things existed. You take the top of a grain bin, and that becomes your gazebo. And I was like, "Whoa, mind blown! That's amazing. I love it." So, I do want to see a silo zebo, but that would be very different again. But RL,
John just mentioned something that very familiar. He mentioned, first off, I just want to say this reads backwards, but I'm a Bill Mollison permaculture fan from about 2004, totally devoted to him. Took a class when I went back to school after I retired from my first career. But he mentioned the part about, oh, we'll figure out that later, meaning the maintenance of it. And that's the exact same thing I'm fighting here, though I totally am. My background was in ag, and I spent my career working in the national parks, both in the States and in Canada. So totally get it. And I'm a total advocate. But what I discovered, well, first, locally, we hear this all the time about, oh, we'll build we'll permit the annexation and the subdivision now. We'll figure out the details later, like how to replace all the bridges that have to be replaced. So the fire trucks, because they can't get out there now because they won't go over the old bridges because they're underrated.
Hmm.
It's like no, stop. You figure it. At least have the discussion up front about what it's going to cost for near-term impacts and also long-term maintenance. And other thing about permaculture I learned is sometimes, and this is just the unfortunate part of having to do with stereotypes, that perma and culture sometimes automatically put people on the defense. John, you probably know that. And it's like, no, wait, so we're not talking about hippie stuff. We're not talking about liberal stuff. We're talking about surviving. And also, the beauty of permaculture is doing things simpler and maybe doing the closest. It's like how you plant your yard out from your house. You don't plant the stuff that gets checked once a month next to the house. You put it at the end of the field. The things that need taken care of every day, you put them right by the back porch. And it's the same thing I stopped using the word permaculture, but tried to convert the thinking so that it was the same logic about you do the things that are logical in step. And in trying to make a discussion make sense to somebody you're trying to win over. Uh, anyway, I'm just adding that because I love permaculture and I've learned how to interpret it. There you go.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. Um, I think we need to do a collaborative book on this. I think there's so much value in it, and um, I mean, Gene has certainly heard me on this, Kelly as well, Donna, of the parallels with water conservation. And this is the bypass question as well, but like water in permaculture is to be slowed and held. Basically, to provide maximum viability. And yes, if there's, you don't want flooding, but you also don't want drought. And the way that we manage that is slowing the water, slowing its roll, and then preventing its sort of the erosive capacity that it brings, but also the way in which it strips out nutrients. And then to flip that and say that's exactly what money is like within our local ecosystems, and that when you allow it to flush freely, it just strips away nutrients and strips away so much of that capacity. But slow money is the reason why I try to shop local. because that money just sits in the cycle for a little bit longer as it funds the local accountant who has bought from the sign shop, who has done the things together with the local lawyer because he got into a fender bender with a local dentist. Like all of those things actually like work over and just keep that money in the cycle for a little while longer. Or the guy that does garden, Chris Gibbons with um, economic gardening, likens it to a bathtub, and he said your bathtub is your reservoir, and like yes, you can be adding in new funds, but the big thing that a lot of communities forget to do is to close the drain. So they're always trying to find ways to fill the tub, but they've got a big, massive drainage just pulling all of that out of their community, and that certainly has an impact on even things like sales tax, where if there are simple things that can be done. I said parks should earn their keep to a certain extent. That doesn't mean privatizing them, but it does mean being thoughtful about like, hey, what would it look like if we had vending permits in each of these sites? If we took small steps to begin to normalize what just head south of the border into Mexico, and like parks are plazas for people to do all the things that people like to do, which includes like buying and selling and exchanging of things. And yes, much like a pollinator sort of wild meadow, it'll be a little messier, but that's part of its design and its value as well. I think is so important. So, yeah, that podcast on bad benches and other park problems, I would definitely recommend it as well. It's just an interesting reflection on what do we do with the things that we have. This is somewhat related, Richard or RL. Your comments made me think of this. I do want to highlight one of the strategies that the city of Winnipeg has done, which is they have now they call them neighborhood action teams. I think that, yeah, neighborhood action teams, or NATs for short. And they go and basically they're on a rotation through neighborhoods, and they're given the permission to like respond to all of the needs in the neighborhood. So they are ready with asphalt, but they're also ready with pruning saws. They're ready with stuff to lift sidewalk sections or repave them if need be. They do things like pedestrian, and what's really stands out to me is when that neighborhood action team is working in your city, you are encouraged to bring your request to them, and it doesn't just get added to the end of the queue and then sort of in a long circuitous way eventually it gets addressed. It's one of those things. And so the mayor has a lot of bad ideas about stroads and subdivisions. He's very much in the world of like build it and they will come, big speculative sort of anti-strongtown stuff. But on this, at least, on the delivery of like localized service, he's actually been really solid and done some good things. But let's pick up a question that I love that, Jay, you've already started to respond to as well, by Jeff. And Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself and just say that community engagement, you already had my interest with the question of being a citizen planner. I will admit, I had to Google that. I was like, what is a citizen planner? Is that me or is that somebody else? What is a citizen planner? And then do you want to share a little bit more about your context and your challenge that you're facing?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay. Yeah, so I have a I have a degree in public administration, and I minored in urban planning, but unfortunately when I graduated it was at the bottom of the recession, the Great Recession in 2012, so no one was hiring. Um, so I ended up getting involved in advisory boards and commissions and speaking at council meetings and stuff like that, and just keeping my hand into it. And I read a lot of stuff. I watch a lot of seminars and webinars. Anytime there's something up on the vote for discussion by the board, I'm researching into it and seeing if there's anything that I can contribute. I don't have any professional experience in a lot of things, and there's a lot of stuff that I don't understand, but urban design is one of my passions. Mixed use, urban density, walkability, which goes into my question. So like I said in my question, there's an expressway in Tampa Bay that runs from Tampa Bay north, and it just got extended into our county a few years ago. And so everyone in the county commission and a lot of citizens have liked to say we've been discovered. So all of a sudden, all roads lead to us. So developers are coming in. There's a lot of projects that are coming in, and there's a lot of sprawl that's still being built. We've had sprawl for 50 years. We have several jumbo developments, jumbo single family residential. We were the oldest population in the state of Florida for years. We're now the second oldest. the villages has taken over that top spot.
Yeah.
But we still have massive single family retired residential, and so we've filled that void. We're done with that, and I'm trying to promote the dense urban walkability, because now that we've got the parkway here, we're also getting some large hospital interest. And with hospitals, you've got a younger set of workers and younger families, doctors, nurses, and then a lot of other stuff is going to come along with that. And I know that my generation, I'm kind of an early millennial, and
Mhm.
then Gen Z and Alpha, they don't want. I know that there's less desire in the large lot subdivisions. A lot of people want a little yard or a green, a town green. Um, you just don't want a lot to take care of, and so I'm trying to encourage that in the county. But as I said in my question, we've got a disengaged citizenry. They're retired. They've given up. They don't care. All they
Mhm.
want is no development and save the environment. That's all they care about. Anytime they stand up and speak at the meetings, that's overwhelmingly what they're talking about. And then I've also got two commissioners that are either anti-development, or what they don't understand new urbanism. They don't understand walkability and density. I just had
Mhm.
one commissioner at the last meeting. She said, if you build more densely, you're going to have more cars, and it's going to make the traffic that we already have even worse.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and I mean, she's in her late 70s. She's the oldest person on the board. So I don't have a strong towns community conversation near me. There is one in Tampa, but I think it's inactive because I've emailed the representative, the
Yeah.
person who was running it. So I don't know if I need to start my own local conversation, and then it's a group of one or a group of two.
Yeah.
But besides that, I'm looking for resources where I can bring to the board, um, to try to educate them on. I found some documents through ULI, through Strong Towns, and some other groups that discuss density and things like that. But I really need some good, strong resources to present to them and say, look, if you want to reduce the traffic, stop widening the roads, because they're already talking about adding a third lane on a 4-lane highway. They already want to add more lanes,
Yeah.
and I'm trying
Yeah.
to explain to them that road width is not the problem. The land use is the problem. Change the
Yeah.
land use, and you fix the problem.
Yeah.
But they're listening to 80s research, 80s information, and then there's also, like I said, the disengaged community. I don't know how to engage them. I don't know. Like I said, do I start my own local conversation and try to market that and advertise and go to the local coffee shops and stand there and talk to people? So those are kind of my two issues that I'm dealing with.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've got some thoughts, but Donna, why don't you start, and then I will share it, and then if others have some suggestions for Jeff as well.
I do recommend starting a local conversation in order to get more people in the community to understand. I think the education is very important as far as getting the message out. And it sounds like you are already relatively educated on the principles of strong towns and urbanism. But my suggestion is run for office. Yeah, no, I'm serious. I
No,
did that.
yeah,
I spoke at council meetings for 5 years,
yeah.
and primarily about the fiscal sustainability, of the
Hmm.
growth and all that. And actually, if you start talking to these retired people and throw money in there, the cost of this
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
fiscal sustainability, they might listen because that is kind of what I did. Um, you need to speak to your audience. And I didn't necessarily accomplish that much as a council member. However, people will more likely listen if you're elected. And during the election process, you can also get your message out as you're campaigning. Now, that sounds like an awful lot, but it can be done because I did it
Hmm.
and I'm in my 70s. So, I would just say go for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Um, the other, I'll say this. One element is the suburban experiment in Florida has, an 80-year head start on you. So you have to spot
Yeah.
yourself about 40 years before you become too discouraged, which
Yeah.
does mean accepting a lot of sort of, not necessarily strategic retreat, but sort of strategic caution on if a project is already entitled, which a lot of this was new to me in Florida that
Hmm.
you can sort of entitle years from now, and basically you
Yeah.
just get the permission for your platted subdivision to go in whenever you are prepared to go ahead and do so. And the result of that is that the cities are in catch-up mode where they are just waiting for yet another project to come online, and then they have to provide as much service as they do there to everybody in the community because of the idea or the ideal of equal service of equal participants. The reality is very different from that. Often the new shiny areas get the new shiny things, and so there's this catch-up process that follows. But to the point of getting a local conversation started, this is actually it's got to be part of your strategy, because just saying, well, there are people that are not listening to me, is going to be the reality. And especially when they hold
Yeah.
seats of power, you need to then create that new nuclei of people that are open and committed to doing something different. And what's interesting in my city, we said we are Deltons for people oriented places. We want better land use and more housing. And we wrote up like a list of here's what we want to see in our community. And the newspaper, for example, was like, whoa, there's finally somebody that's actually articulating a positive vision of what they want to see for the community, not just one of guarding, protecting, sort of
Hmm.
defending, but actually saying like we want our community to become more inclusive and capable of being diverse. In order for that to happen, we need to make better land use decisions. I shared several different articles and suggestions in the chat, um, uh, but I would also just drop in the article that Chuck wrote on his journey from a free market ideologue, which would be probably the prevailing sort of strand of sober-minded conservatives who are, in your community. So some are
Hmm.
just going to be reactive to the idea of like, why are you even asking me questions about my single lot home? At the same time, don't ever do anything else around me because property rights
Hmm.
include the whole neighborhood. In this new version of it, like we've gotten into this whole situation. So but Chuck's ability to articulate, like, one, the recognition this is not a free market. The second recognition, we actually have a lot of agency in what we need to do here. And then that third component, which is just the illusion of wealth, is so pervasive. The idea we're doing it is really hard to break. So we had when we were working in Lake County, city manager stands up and he says, "Look, the point of a city is not to earn a profit. Don't you get it? The city has to lose money so that way private entities are able to make money." And we showed their community leaders the books, and we're showing like your city manager is running you off of a cliff. But his thing was, well, we have the funds, we need to spend them, and if we need to borrow, we should do that too, because that's how we become however you put it, the new thing that's noticed in the region. And the irony being that the very tools that people in your community would be able to identify as capable of creating more traffic, namely more lanes, more road capacity, bigger intersections, longer signal times, all of those things. If we know that that's what creates more, then doing the opposite of it is actually very logically the opposite of what is the thing that we need to do in our places. So,
Right.
like you said, we've said, I think somewhat not facetiously, but as a challenge, a thought experiment. What if we built no new roads? So not just no new highways, but no more like big roads, big collectors and arterials. Um, that actually would be totally sensible. It would save us a lot of money, and all of the perceived areas of pinch points and congestion would have to be resolved in other tools. And suddenly, things like transit become viable when you allow for pressure to begin to accumulate to such a point that those things become viable. There's a reason that Chugwater, Wyoming, doesn't have Uber, but Vancouver, British Columbia does. It's because there's actually a viable sort of market for these types of things, and even the rise of private ride hailing apps, like in pretty obscure places, have people that are like, yeah, I'll give people rides. Is the recognition? Oh, there is demand for a early version of a transit system. It's just in the form of private vehicles, but then moving it into that next layer of how do we build sort of the core components of good, strong village life. And I think that might be one of those areas to try to use language that's heavy on nostalgia. I often use, photos from our historic society. They were actually kind of curious, like, who are you that you're asking for these? And I was like, trust me, I am your best advocate because I'm saying we need to bring back what we used to do instead of just like marvel. Wasn't that a lovely boardwalk? I'm like, why don't we have that boardwalk today? Let's bring back these like core features. And so any kind of nostalgia, the challenge in your areas, if it's orange groves or swamps, there was no sort of there were elements of human settlement sort of activity there, but you can point to like even a place like the Villages is an example of trying to imitate much of what constituted prior versions of village life, just with golf carts instead of vehicles, which is already an upgrade. But then the sprawling version of that in the Villages, and I've yet to tour there, but I need to get there because it is a fascinating ecosystem. Talk about a
It's an
human experiment,
experience.
but what's that?
It's an experience being in the villages.
Yeah. So, Jay, over to you, and then RL. I
Yeah.
hope that's helpful, Jeff, Jay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I was going to say definitely thumbs up on the conversation, but I mean, I would also approach it from kind of the aspect of get a group of people who are like-minded, especially people who may be in the house buying age, and then go and talk to the developers. Developers want to make money. That's their driving thing is they want to build what people are going to buy.
Right.
And so once you have a cohort of 5, 6 people who are saying, hey, these are the types of houses we actually want to buy. We don't want what you're building. That's when you can start getting their attention as well.
Yeah.
Because developers can change their plans just as easy as anybody else. Going for some sort of county regulations or things like that about trying to change how stuff is done, that takes so much time. And it's just a uphill battle of trying to get enough people to support you versus trying to get a good community built by a developer probably is going to be a quicker win.
Yeah. Great insight. RL?
Actually, two things. I want to follow up on something Jay just said, but for Jeff, because you're kind of a one-man show at this point, Donna mentioned something that is a really golden nugget, and she mentioned fiscal responsibility. And this has to do with you can look up the numbers for your community in terms of what they're projecting to spend, what they are spending in terms of expenses, and also what they're delaying, what they're not talking about. And in a particular development application, it's a silo. They're only talking about what affects the application. They're not talking about anything else a few blocks away. But yet, if you present to the public or whoever you're talking about the big picture to say, well, and this has to do with the seniors and everything that they just want all the nice stuff, which is great, but it's like, how are you going to pay for the future and da 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 da. Just the reality to have them open up their eyes to what things cost, and that might be it's something one person can do if you like to dig in the finance department, if they'll share with you, or through the city council reports. And what Jay just mentioned is great about going and talking to the developers directly. An area that I'm dealing with is we have basically 2 developers that have a lock hole because they figured it out and they've locked on to the city manager, and it's like the city manager always says, well, we have to accept there and we have to green light their applications, and we're going, wait a minute, why don't you put out a request for submissions from a lot of developers to let people in other areas know we're looking for new and cooler and more ingenious stuff, and have some competition come in. And it's another version of what I heard and what you're saying. Yeah, it's like trying to get the developers fired up to compete with one another and get the best ones in.
That is something that I actually was thinking about if there was an RFP, RFQ process because we've got a lot of open land, a lot of former cattle pasture that is has been rezoned and is currently being rezoned to residential or mixed use or whatnot. And I was thinking, what if we did that? What if we actually solicited
Yeah.
for those proposals from developers and said, we are looking for this, and
Yeah.
then see what comes in, and then say, we're going to make it easy on these developers because this is the kind of development that we want.
Yeah.
Mhm. Love the question. That's actually related, I think, Jeff, to your question, because pocket neighborhoods are one of those types of gentle density, sort of the stealth density that, all of a sudden,
Hmm.
if you don't have my city up until recently, they just nuked it. And I'm so glad they did, was the number of dwellings per hectare or per
Hmm.
acre. And it's
Hmm.
one of those really weird, like, efforts to be precisely right when it's actually better just to be roughly right, because they were trying to basically say, oh, that way we can capture like how much infrastructure load there's going to be. But like a pocket neighborhood, which is typically a common green with homes that are spread around it, typically those homes tend to be quite small because you're using a limited parcel size to be able to then create that. There are definitely instances that are so picture friendly, so gorgeous of pocket neighborhoods. All of the reasons why, like some of the best literature on pocket neighborhoods, like describe the community values of it. The trouble that we've seen when we have done workshops and consultation sessions with small scale developers is that they find if they could get to the point where they can do a pocket neighborhood, they could just as easily do a linear townhome development and squeeze in a few more homes. And so it becomes a question of the pro forma for the whole site having to justify the amount of investment in that common realm portion, as well as then some of the interest that people have for, you could say, outright ownership of their parcel, is tougher in a cottage courtyard, because you're going to have a condo or a strata that is still responsible for the maintenance of the common area, or you're coming up with some kind of a shared arrangement. And so I know part of our quest is to encourage pathways to ownership, where you are not sort of paying a strata fee. In my region, we call them strata fees, but you might have something similar. But the condoization of any kind of multi-unit development is definitely an impediment to people being willing to have that come on, because either it has to be owner occupied so that the owner occupies one of them and then other units are made available as rentals, but that's harder to cash flow than five people all being able to buy in their own portion of the lot and then make that work. However, it is one of those things that, especially in sort of the a version of like a cul-de-sac, the other primary reason why those are harder to do is parking requirements on small scale sites. And so removing parking mandates does require, I think, some real honesty on the part of any like builder that is going to do projects like this, of these first three units on each side are going to have parking spaces. The last two are not. And I bet you'll sell those last two, and you'll save a little bit on like that land availability, because you need space for, like, the municipality will say you need spaces set aside for garbage, you need spaces set aside for fire lane access. And so anything we can do to carve out any of that like required land to make it just a little bit less is one of the strategies to begin to bring costs down or to be able to deliver more in the form of amenities. And that definitely stands out as some of the reasons. So I wish that I saw pocket neighborhoods all over, because they are a traditional development pattern. They are part of
Hmm.
our old form. We see them, we lust after them. We're like, oh, wouldn't it be nice? And then we just don't make that available. Does anybody else have experience with that? Because it seems like the closest that people have come to pocket neighborhoods in the 70s and 80s was trailer home parks, which actually functioned really well. The difficulty was the path to ownership was very different. Or you got the specialized ones like in Seattle, where they had to amend some of their building codes, some of their setback requirements, to allow for clustered housing with discrete buildings. And then the other question with a cottage court is always, what would the next increment for any of those homes look like? So we would say, will any of them be allowed to mature, or is the idea, no, leave it as like a Beatrix Potter cottage from now on until eternity comes? That may not meet everybody's housing needs, but Bonnie, I'd love your thoughts, and then if anybody else wants to jump in as well.
Yeah, I've been at this for quite a few years, and the current iteration is looking at church properties,
Yeah, yeah,
because 40% of churches are likely to not be churches in the next 20 years. So, looking to partner with some churches in the area to, and maybe a community land trust arrangement. I mean, we're also, my community, which is Appleton, Wisconsin. We have a group called the, um, it's a housing alliance, and the gist is I'm on a team where we're looking to build a fund that people can use. It's like a second mortgage,
yeah.
and that's their down payment. So we're trying a ton of different ways to make things pencil, um, including different building materials. The biggest thing I'm running into are the parking requirements, the setback requirements. Appleton is just on the cusp of pitching another reiteration or another
Mm,
iteration of their community plan,
okay.
their comprehensive plan, and I'm waiting to see how much of the ideas we've been pitching they actually did incorporate in the new plan.
Yeah.
But I'm up for any ideas anybody has because I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall.
One quick strategy, and then we'll go to Jay. That Nolan Gray sort of tipped me off to on a podcast with Kevin Klinkenberg called the Messy City podcast, talking about zoning, was that the original zoning bylaws from the 1950s and the 1960s, when a lot of this was being introduced, kind of new Euclid, that the famous zoning case had been successfully won, but there was just this idea, okay, now we have added tools. Those zoning bylaws were remarkably clean and simple. They actually would have allowed many of the types of things around, even things like clustered homes, but subsequent layers of, well, if this is good, let's do more, let's do more. And so there may be historic precedents in Appleton of, hey, could we actually revert to an older version of our zoning bylaw that actually would make these types of things simpler, not by explicitly naming a cottage court zone, but by more broadly defining what is suitable or permissible within residential development. That might be one of those tools that my current go-to is like the delete button is the thing that most of our cities need the most, just to remove a lot of the dross that's accumulated over time. Jay, over to you. Gone for Good. Oh, I will. I'll have to check that out. Thank you for Bonnie. Jay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of it also comes down to the financial aspects of it, and not just the cost to build, but also the cost to maintain. I mean, you were kind of talking about how do you maintain that semi-public space in that, especially like with cottage court and thing like that. One of the ones I know that he's getting brought up a lot on some of the Strongtown stuff is if you look like the old Melrose Place TV show where they have where they have the cottage court with the pool in the middle and everything like that. Those really can't be built because again, you still have to have something that owns that center area, or everybody doesn't own their own units, and so that gets into an ownership issue, and then or you start looking at things like single residence occupancy or things like that. But I do think that there's a huge housing shortage for those people who are single or a couple just living together with no kids that don't need a 3-bedroom 2-bath house.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I think we're starting to see this where you're seeing like a couple of backyard cottages. So now, or in tiny homes, I think I've started to like nudge the parameters of what's considered possible. Where having two tiny homes situated in sort of their own sort of enclaves with a primary home on the front of the lot has kind of shown people like this is not revolutionary. I've always argued that the introduction of those things has less of an impact on your community than the introduction of a new vehicle. So if my neighbor buys a bigger truck, that has more of an impact on my community than if they put two backyard cottages into the side yard of the backyard. And I'll go toe to toe with anybody on that because the impact of like large vehicles in our spaces, in terms of pavement wear, all of those types of things. But it's interesting that we still contest the idea of this gradual emergence out of single family dominated neighborhoods, which again is just adolescence for most neighborhoods. Those shacks were single family. The shacks that Chuck talks about in the Strongtown story of like how did neighborhoods develop? They begin as just like single places, and then they begin to metastasize. Or well, that's a bad word. They begin to evolve and grow and develop a greater capacity. So, Mary, I will check that Oh wow. Love that you've got historic neighborhoods that have these core within them. So that's fantastic. I know that we are just about at the top of the hour. No, we are at the top of the hour. This has been great. Really appreciate you all joining me for this session of Ask Strong Town Say Anything. Thanks for being part of this.